There was a story, a true if slightly embellished story, about how the Ontario village was given its name, its church, its brewery, its tavern, its gardens, its grottos, its splendid indoor and outdoor altars, how it acquired its hotel, its blacksmith shop, its streets and roads, its tannery, its cemetery, its general store. This was a legend that appealed to fewer and fewer people in the depression of the early 1930s. Times being what they were, not many villagers had the energy for the present, never mind the past.
It had been late in the afternoon. Balanced on a hill behind them, the setting sun appeared to be tangled in the twisted forms of a stump fence, its rays coloring the steam of their breath a soft orange. Though they had known each other most of their lives, they were suddenly uncomfortable with each other and confused by the impulse that had set them off to skate in this strange place, alone, while the other young villagers were filling the pond with laughter. Clara had turned suddenly, and they had crashed together, had fallen, as if killed in combat. Then they had lain quite still on the ice, mysterious and knowing something neither could speak about.
She would remember this forever, this act they called sin, her body boneless, some new vine flowering in her veins. And then, when it was over, she recalled the afternoon they had skated on the ice, how they had fallen there. Here at night, Tillman's dreams of burning his own wooden leg would be interrupted by the shouts of nightmare-ridden men who had not even begun to recover from the trauma of the war. Some of these same men could be heard crying themselves to sleep after lights out.
Floated away in the middle of September, leaving the dog barking wildly on the beloved bridge, and leaving too all the various textures of the undulating terrain that had become so familiar to him. He had, though he did not know it, his first encounter with intimacy, his first experience of knowing something, anything, so well and in such proximity that he would never forget it.
The grief was losing its sharpness. It could perhaps bruise, but could no longer really cut most hearts. Rarely now did women weep in their beds for a man whose face and body they had known in the teens of the century, or for a child the earth took back too soon. Howard began to feel like a vessel into which the world's diminishing sorrow was poured for safekeeping, and the weight of it was heavy on his bones. Canadian understood then that this kind man carried in his body fragments of the catastrophe of the Battle of Verdun, fragments that now and then, like Tillman's own memories, worked themselves to the surface.
The details of the last time she had seen him ran over and over in her mind. She attempted to reconstruct the scene, change the outcome, to melt, in retrospect, her own coldness. She wanted to make herself open up to Eamon, warm him with her embrace, to hold him so that he would no longer be missing, broken.
Clara knew this would be the last time she touched Eamon, that when they finished carving his name, all the confusion and regret of his absence would unravel, just as surely as if she had embraced him with forgiving arms.
His sister had no real knowledge of what the return to Vimy had meant for Tillman. Among the throng that had gathered to work on the monument, he would be the only man who carried the battle in his mind, who carried the scars of the battle on his person, and from whom the battle had stolen flesh. The lower part of his leg had been abandoned somewhere in this landscape, the thigh being amputated later. Now that he was back at the site, Tillman thought he should be able to identify the shell hole, that he would somehow be drawn to the exact spot where the mud had swallowed his limb.
This was in a time before color photography was invented, a time when the memory of the realistic hues and tints of the natural world was still carried in their minds. Painters rarely strove to imitate real color, or interested even then in the transformation demanded by their art. The emerging craft of photography reduced all scenes to various shades of black and gray, making images oddly more like printed descriptions of themselves.
No repairs. As one standing in the valley looking up year after year, I should like to see how this construction decays, how long it takes before it becomes a ruin. What would go first, do you think? The windows, of course, blown out of their casements by mountain winds, and then quite possibly the doors. After the roof goes, then there is no hope. Rain, snow begins to eat the plaster and the beams. After that it becomes a ruin, and there is no turning back. It is the same with almost anything that remains abandoned. Friends, sweethearts, places, homelands, houses, in this castle in my mind. After a certain period of time, the roof goes, and there is no turning back. Still, it is important to see what kind of a ruin remains, for it is my contention that only the greatest works make beautiful ruins.